In this video, I am going to be talking about bonsai soil. In particular, I'm going to compare cat litter to Akadama. If we're only just meeting, my name is Darren and my channel is all about bringing you information and inspiration as I grow my bonsai through the seasons. So if you're new here, consider subscribing. So let's dive into this video. So when we talk about cat litter for bonsai soil, particularly in the UK, what we're actually talking about is one particular type of cat litter that's made from Molar Clay. There are two brands that are available, at least in the UK, that are Molar Clay. The first is from Tesco, the second is Sanicat Pink. I'll provide some links down in the description so that you can check those out. There are also one or two bonsai specialists that stock Molar Clay, so you could also check those out as well. Okay, so what is Molar Clay and what makes it useful for bonsai soil? It's a clay particle which consists of approximately 1/3 clay and 2/3 diatomaceous earth. It's mined in Denmark and imported to the UK for a variety of uses, one of which is cat litter. So really I think when we are talking about bonsai soil, we shouldn't call it cat litter because there are various types of materials used for cat litter. What we should actually say is Molar Clay. It'd be much less confusing. So from now on, I'm going to talk about just Molar Clay and I'm going to stop using the term cat litter. So Molar Clay has a number of properties that make it viable as a bonsai soil. So the first important property is that it holds water and it makes that water available to the roots. The next useful aspect of Molar Clay is that it's pretty good at holding onto the nutrients that we provide in our fertiliser and releasing those nutrients to the roots to be used by our tree. Another useful feature of Molar Clay is that being heat treated in the manufacturing process, the particle remains stable. And what I mean by that is that the particle simply doesn't break down via freeze-thaw cycles. Another good point is being a cat litter and being more than one brand, it's readily available, particularly in the UK. There are supermarkets selling it and pet stores selling it, and you can also get it online from Amazon, etc. It's relatively cheap and you can simply pop out and grab a bag. There are a couple of disadvantages with using Molar Clay. First of all, it does hold quite a lot of water, so if you're potting a tree or a species that prefers to be on the dry side, Molar Clay can hold a lot of water, and so there is a chance that you'll be keeping those roots too wet. And another disadvantage is that because the freeze-thaw cycles don't break the particle down, what happens is when the water inside the particle does freeze, it expands, it leaves the particle, and those ice crystals can push the soil up in this kind of what's referred to as the meringue effect, which can be quite a disturbing sight. It's unclear to me whether this actually causes damage to the roots, but intuitively it does seem like something we'd rather avoid if we can. Finally, one more disadvantage, depending on how you look at it, is that the particles of soil actually aren't penetrable by the roots. What I mean by that is the pores of the particle are not big enough for a root to grow into the particle itself. We'll actually talk about that point a little bit more a bit later in the video. So, Akadama. It's a substrate that's mined in Japan. It's a volcanic clay substance and it's used extensively in Japan for growing not just bonsai but other plants in containers as well, in place of our traditional potting composts. So some of the good points about Akadama for growing bonsai are that it retains moisture well and it also holds on to nutrients and makes those nutrients available to the root system. Not as good as Molar Clay, but still pretty good relative to other inorganic aggregate soil that we use for bonsai. The most important aspect of Akadama for bonsai purposes though is that the particles are in fact penetrable by the roots. They enter the pores, and upon growing through the grain of Akadama, the root thickens. This causes the Akadama particle to fracture and divide, and in doing so it also causes the root to divide into two finer roots. So this is really important because as the root penetrates the soil particle breaks into two smaller pieces and the root divides into two or more smaller roots. So what we've got is the soil actively encouraging the roots to become finer and finer and denser, while also scaling down in size so that it can efficiently support those finer and more dense roots. By supporting this highly refined root system, Akadama allows us to develop trees which have got a high degree of ramification, and by that what I mean is lots and lots and lots of fine twigging, small foliage, all of these attributes that we value so highly in a high quality bonsai tree. Now I mentioned that Molar Clay doesn't allow the roots to penetrate the soil particle, and so we don't get this self-scaling, highly efficient system happening over time inside the bonsai pot with Molar. And this is where all the heated debate comes in and causes such contention. There are a couple of disadvantages with Akadama. One being availability. It's only available from bonsai suppliers, and it's a little bit pricier than some other substrates because it's imported from Japan. But I think for a lot of people, a more significant issue with Akadama is that it does break down via freeze-thaw cycles. So water is absorbed by the particle, it freezes, expands and breaks the particle down. Now although we like the root to break the particle down because it encourages the root to divide and become finer, it's undesirable for freeze-thaw cycles to break down our Akadama particles because that happens without encouraging the root system to become finer and finer. So you get particles that are smaller and smaller and smaller, but the root system isn't becoming more and more refined, and therefore it's less and less an efficient system in terms of our balance of water and oxygen. Unfortunately, there's no clear-cut answer to should I use Molar Clay or should I use Akadama. There are different approaches to the cultivation of bonsai. On one side you've got the very Japanese approach, which is based on Akadama, and on the other side you've got an approach that doesn't use Akadama, which prefers to use particles that don't break down over time. So choosing between Molar Clay and Akadama is more a question of trade-offs rather than a right or wrong answer. So I can give you my preference and my approach, and you'll have to go away and decide which approach you would prefer. For my really young 2-year-old seedlings, I actually use multi-purpose compost in combination with air pruning pots for rapid growth while not costing a fortune and requiring constant watering. For my trees that are a bit further along and are in the later stages of development, I will switch over to Molar Clay because it holds on to a lot of nutrients and is readily available and cheap to buy in quantity. When I start to move towards more highly refined trees, I will look to incorporate Akadama into the mix, whether that be combined with pumice and lava for conifers or straight Akadama for broadleaf species. So that's just my approach. Do a bit of research, think about your own requirements and how you think you'd like to proceed. Maybe do a bit of experimentation, but bear in mind that there is no right or wrong answer. It's just a case of trade-offs. If you found this information helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you would smash that like button. If you've got any comments or questions, write down below, and Finally, if you're not subscribed already, hit that subscribe button. It would really make my day. Have fun, keep learning, keep growing, and I'll speak to you soon.